And now, for the next 30 minutes, As the Prop Turns. Brought to you today by Ranger Tugs, Cutwater Boats, and Solara Boats. Quality cruising, real community.
All right. Well, welcome to episode 12 of As the Prop Turns. So we have a little bit of a new configuration. Instead of doing Zoom in different areas, we're all going to sit together and discuss together. We have Kenny Mars, Tim Bates, Andrew Custis, and Ivan Guzman from the customer service team here. We have Jeff Messmer here from the customer service team, management team, every team, head janitor. I'm here from the marketing side, and then we also have Brian and Cole from the marketing side. They're both behind the cameras working hard. If you guys could see what they have set up here, it's pretty cool. So thank you guys, and thank you guys for being here.
All right, well, we're in Desolation Sound. We're anchored up. We're rafted up, enjoying ourselves, and crack a refreshment, and then you say, oh, how much battery do I have left? Well, the lights are on, the underwater lights are on. How much battery are we using? And so that kind of prompted us to talk about why lithium and why, in particular, lithium iron phosphate batteries. So I guess that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And Kenny, take it away. Why lithium iron phosphate?
You know, I think the biggest thing, just in a nutshell, is it eliminates the need for a gas generator. When you're thinking about some of our smaller boats, just, space is a premium. So when you're traveling, like a lot of us do with families, kids, every little bit of storage counts. So when you're out, Sam, you have like 9 bags of cameras and drones and everything else you take. So just the simple fact of not having to run a generator to run your AC devices. So barbecues, your air conditioning, your microwave. I don't have to have the gen running just to do that. The other thing is, as you're cruising and I need those devices, I would have to run a generator, right? So I'm another fuel source. I have to run that gen for fuel. Now it's simple. With lithium, it just simplifies the whole process. So now, as we're anchored out, which a lot of us like to do, that's typically what we're doing.
Yep.
Once we break from the marinas, we like to go find our spots that we don't tell anyone else about.
Yep.
And we like to go anchor. So at that point, I can use my devices. I'm not worried about running my generator. It's not noisy. So, with the lithium, like basically per battery, you have more capacity than you ever did with the AGMs. So now, even though I might have, say 2 house batteries, the amp hours I have on those batteries and what I can use of those batteries is significantly more.
Yeah, it's 2.5 to 3 times more.
Exactly.
The same weight of batteries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now I still have the added benefit of having the storage. So, and not only that is just the lifespan of that battery. Now you're getting 10 plus years out of those lithium batteries. Right. So that's huge in its own.
More upfront cost, but over the course of the ownership, you get your money's worth out of them.
Yeah, no annual maintenance like you have on a gen. So even if you don't put the hours on it, you still have to do annual maintenance. Yeah. So that adds up as well for just having that setup on a boat.
And what are some other reasons why lithium iron phosphate in particular?
Just the safety aspect of them. They're the safest, and we were talking about the chemistry a little bit earlier of the batteries, but it's the safest application you can have in those batteries. Yeah. So that's the big reason why.
And the insurance companies, as far as insuring boats that have the batteries in it, they're NMMA certified, ABYC certified. So the insurance companies are all over all over that, and it's okay to have lithium iron phosphate batteries.
Without a doubt, yeah, that's huge.
As long as you don't say lithium.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Iron
gotta
phosphate is
finish it
the-
with that.
Right.
That's the key.
What about power management? So we're going to talk about power management and monitoring here in a bit. So they've also been using the lithium iron phosphate batteries in industrial and
Commercial
applications
Yeah.
for
20 years.
20 years. Okay.
Yeah. So they've been around. This isn't like it's absolutely brand new. It's been used in several different applications as well, not just the marine side.
Yeah. And then what about, we talked a little bit about the internal BMS and then the voltage, holding it a steady voltage.
Yeah, so kind of like if you think of your cell phone, I can use all of that cell phone really until it's dead. It's not like I get to 50% and my cell phone's getting dim, right? It's the same idea with these batteries on the boat is, I can use 90% of the battery before, I really need to think about charging them again, or my light's getting dim at night, so that's a huge factor of having the larger capacity. I can use the majority of that, just, simplifying it down.
And the batteries have, internal the batteries, they have their battery
Management system, yeah. So you can't overcharge them, you can't deplete them too much. Like they'll basically protect themselves, right?
Yeah.
So you can't hurt them.
Right. And
Is the idea.
And that leads to the longevity of the battery.
Exactly.
Or it helps with that. I guess they also don't off gas.
Right.
So we talked about that. Okay. So converting a boat from AGM or lead acid to lithium, can it be done? I guess number one, and then if it can be done, how complicated is it?
We get calls a lot
Yeah.
on people that are switching, from, I know that we've had, some of our owners that have converted and done it, but there's a lot of components that go into changing, from an AGM or lead acid. A lot of people think it's just a matter of, well, it looks just like a normal 12-volt battery, so I'll throw it in there, and it's not, because like Kenny was saying, when you increase the size of a battery bank, you also have to increase the size of all your cabling, and you have to put in,
Battery charging and
specific charging that goes into lithium, and that's the hardest part about doing it. But there's components that we'll dive, kind of deeper into, like DC to DC chargers that have to go in, and just certain things. But now putting in Victron monitoring systems, which we'll dive a little bit deeper into.
Right. So I guess the short answer is that it can be done.
It can be done.
It's not just a matter of changing from one battery to the other. There's more components involved.
Right.
There's plenty of YouTube videos about converting.
We've all watched them.
We've all watched them. We're definitely not the ones that do that.
Right.
But there's people out there that do, and you might, if you're interested, then I would check out those videos and search out somebody that can do that kind of work.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I guess the next question is,
so I think we should take a step back of why we use them. What is a battery, what is a lithium battery, and why do we use them for the house bank on our boats? And like Kenny was saying, it's really about the weight, the additional storage, the extended life cycles. Some of these are getting 10,000 life cycles out of the lithium batteries, whereas an AGM or a standard lead acid, you might get 3, 4, 500. So, 10, 11 years you should expect out of these batteries rather than 2 or 3 seasons. I think it's really important also that we talk kind of about what type of lithium batteries we use. There's 100 different ones out there, from your cell phone batteries to, all the horror stories you hear about the different types. The lithium phosphate is by far the safest battery. So it's maybe not the most dense lithium battery, but it's by far the safest, and that's why we're okay to put them on our boats. Certainly the higher capacity is a big part of that. Most of our house banks are 600 amp hours now, which 90% of those are usable, compared to an AGM where you're use it for 300, 400 amp hours, and you can use half of those. So to not have the generator, to not have the maintenance, to not have that big generator in your aft hold is just really nice to have. But, as you guys mentioned, they've been in commercial and industrial applications for 10, 20 years. We're just getting to them now because they have become a little bit more safe.
Yeah. I think one thing that we didn't touch on is you talked about 600 amp hours of lithium, but compare that if we will coming up in the slide, we're doing a 27 that we did some testing on, but compare that to a prior 27 with AGM in terms of the house size. We still use 2 batteries of lithium.
Same way.
Where before we used 2 batteries of AGM, but what was the capacity of those in an
On the
AGM
2
application?
previously, we were about 110 amp hours apiece, which you could use half of that. So you had maybe 110 amp hours of usable batteries, where now we have 500 or 600. But the other big part of that is that internal battery system. I mean, how many times have we drained a battery on your car, on whatever it might be?
Sam,
Like,
how many times?
Couple.
Yeah. Don't ever get a boat after Sam's.
Yeah,
they do,
number of reasons.
right. They do shut themselves off at that 10%. So they're going to save basically that lifespan. You're not going to damage the battery by running it low. It's just like your phone in terms of when it gets down to that certain percentage, it just shuts off.
Yeah.
So tons of different reasons, but we've certainly been very happy with the lithium batteries.
So let's talk about off-grid. Get out there, anchor up, turn on everything, get the radio going, stereo
Use
going,
every single outlet possible.
lights on, cockpit
Batteries
lights.
charging, camera batteries charging, inverter.
Well, Kenny brought up on the trailer aspect, which I hadn't thought about. If your boat's on a trailer and you want to use some of these systems, you don't have to run a generator, which the generators need water. So to be able to run a lot of those AC components, right off of the batteries, is not just for in the water, but also if you're trailering to your destination and, you're on the boat the night before.
Whether you're just getting ready to put it in the water to go boating, or whether you're boat or homing. We talked about that, going to campgrounds. We've had lots of customers do that, and it makes it completely, mobile.
Yep, boat or homing.
So, so when we're off the grid, and what are some advantages of the solar and lithium when you're off the grid, as far as just longevity and
What'd you notice, Sam?
Well, so Desolation Sound trip this year, I think I was out for 14 days. And
I think you're out a few more.
Yeah.
If, your
More than his
vacation-
available.
Yeah. I
was
think
out
there
for
were
a
a few
long
I did
time.
get
extra.
some additional PTO.
Yeah, there was,
requests.
there was,
almost 3.5 weeks, but go on. Anyways.
but
That was the main difference.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
I think I only plugged in the night before I left in Everett, and maybe one night when we were at a marina, but I didn't even need to.
Just to do it.
Just the solar and that 600 amp hour battery bank, and I was fine.
And you have the Ranger 27.
Yep, Ranger 27. And I mean, we weren't using, while we were underway, we'd use the water heater occasionally. We cooked mainly on the cooktop and propane grill, but music, lights, anything, charging batteries. But I didn't even get close.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I've had zero concern with battery capacity.
That's the thing.
nice.
Right.
Is that anxiety of running your batteries dead, anchored out with your family.
Yeah.
Like, if it's us, it's one thing.
Right.
But when you have everyone else there and everyone's turning lights on and stuff, you're like, hey, don't turn that on.
Yeah.
Hey, leave the,
Trying
it's
to
like,
read.
yeah,
That's me
it's,
in the past.
it is.
Yeah.
And that was the worry of you're being out in the middle of nowhere and you running your batteries dead.
Guessing how much power you got
Yeah.
remaining.
So Tim, can you speak to we hit on it, air conditioning, but really it's heat and air conditioning.
Absolutely, yeah. So
And
heating, cooling.
Can you talk about, you shared an experience down on the water on a cold day here recently.
Yeah.
And what that was like.
Well, I think it's also important that we talk about how the boats do hold heat. They do hold the cooling. It's not one where you're running it necessarily full time, but we're turning it on for maybe 15, 20 minutes in the morning. And, after that, you have that big lithium bank. So it's not just, like you said, air conditioning. It's also heating, which here in Washington, we obviously need quite a bit more than the cooling side. But Kenny and I had a factory delivery this summer where they left in, I think, April and came back 70 days later, said we didn't plug into shore power one time. So, I mean, to be able to do that without a generator is just, it makes it so you can go some of these places where maybe they don't have power, maybe they don't have shore power. And you brought up, you're on an anchor, who wants to start the generator in the middle of the night to charge a battery? So I think it just gives you a lot of flexibility to kind of go to some of those places that maybe don't have shore power available or.
For sure, and we'll talk about here in a minute about how long you can run your heat or air conditioning with the lithium.
Exactly.
I guess, Andrew, tell us about what is a Victron battery monitor and why is it so cool?
Well, that was probably the number one request when we put lithium in is you have to know how much battery you have left. Like Sam, you said, using your boat, you never even got close. Well, in the old days, we didn't really know what close was. The just kind of like I said earlier, the Victron is a fuel gauge for your batteries, and so it allows you to see outgoing power. If I'm running a refrigerator, I can see, I'm drawing 3 amps, and it'll show you either right on the display or wirelessly on your phone.
Okay, so there's
where you
an
can
app for your phone?
You can use an app. So if you're laying in bed and you're going, did I forget to turn off my underwater lights? We see that all the time. It goes, you get used to kind of seeing how much power is coming out of that amp monitor or the Victron display. But it also gives you the ability to see in time. So, I always tell everybody when they're looking at it, look at the amps that are coming out, which will calculate in and out for you, and it'll show you time. So if you're running a refrigerator, which we'll go through coming up, and actual usage, it'll tell you, hey, when you have this on, you might have 200 hours remaining. So when you wake up in the morning, I'm still going to have battery power.
Right.
But that Victron is a
You're going
lifesaver.
to sleep better with it.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, it's
Will it monitor my anchor for me also?
no, but with lithium power,
I can leave my chart plot.
which we used to. You shut it all down. Now you can. We'll show you what that looks like.
Oh man, I'm going to sleep really well tonight.
CPAP machines.
Yeah, exactly.
So we got a Ranger 27 that just came off the line,
Right.
and we put some testing to it.
We did.
Tell us what we found.
We pulled the boat outside because we needed to run it on air conditioning, but we also wanted to do it on a no sun day to really kind of take the solar out of the equation. So we pulled it outside, and we went through each component, really kind of little things, whether it's your indirect lighting that you think, that's really low power consumption, and anchor lights and nav lights, and separated those by component, kind of like power management 1. When we did this, you guys brought up, this is the first As the Prop Turns that we did, was power management. Now it's power management lithium, which is kind of, I tell everyone it gets to a point that lithium just unlocks all the features on your boat. In the earlier days, we said you can't run a water heater.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, I have an inverter, it can run. Well, we'll get into that too, of where, how the voltage gets pulled down and how the inverters don't like that. But back to what you see now is you'll see on your screen is a graph of all the different components or devices that we ran. So there's a couple key ones that you should pay attention to now, just jumping into it, and that is the parasitic draw, which is even if you have all your battery switches off on the boat, there's going to be components that are still live or powered 24 hours a day, all the time. And those are things that are like bilge pumps that need to be active, even if you turn your switches off. Carbon monoxide detectors, propane solenoid operation, stereo memory. Those are all part of the parasitic draw. And so the first step that we did when we started testing was to figure out what that parasitic draw is. And the hard part to do that is you can't just take it outside, because you might have a little bit of sun bringing in 4 or 5 amps of power. And that's kind of, when you're looking at that Victron, that is taken away. So you really got to take the solar out of it, no battery charging, and start with everything off. How much power are we drawing?
Yeah.
And on this specific boat, on the 27, it was under 1 amp of power. So I think it was around 0.7 amps is what my parasitic draw is. So you figure that's going to be going against your batteries no matter what you have turned on. And then another one to pay attention to, which we deal with all the time, you know, I go on your boat, what the heck do you have the inverter on for? You're not even using anything. It's the, you know, we call it inverter. Jeff doesn't do that, by the way.
There's my wife.
We're going to blame our wives now.
She doesn't even know where the button is, I don't think.
She's not watching.
Does she watch this? Yeah.
Sorry, honey.
Yeah. But you'll look at there and it says inverter idle. And that's basically your inverter powered on, but you don't have any breakers on that are running on the inverter right now. So just having an inverter at idle draws as much power as your parasitic draw does.
Yeah.
And so those are things that help you, once you kind of establish a baseline, it helps you figure out, you know, where can I go from here? I know that, you know, we separate it from navigation. We recently switched to all LED lighting on our navigation lights and our anchor lights. And you go, geez, you know, nav lights you don't care as much about because you're underway. You're running an engine, which we'll touch on as well. You know, the engine's charging those batteries when the nav lights are on. But when you're anchored, or Tim brought up earlier today, maybe you're on a mooring buoy, you need to leave your anchor light on. Now you're under a 0.5 amp draw to be able to run those things. So,
And this is important to know, regardless of whether you have whatever battery system you have in your boat.
Absolutely.
You need to know what these things are drawing, and this is great to help with that.
yeah, and if you don't have an amp gauge like the Victron we do, you can still use this chart to say, oh, you know what? I didn't realize that, you know, my LED cabin lights or my indirect lights draw that much power. So you could actually put that into time. You know, if I ran this for, you know, if it draws 1 amp and I ran it for 8 hours, well, I'm going to use 8 amps of power out of my, in our case of a lithium bank, out of our 600 amp hours that would be remaining.
And just to clarify, the usage hours is off of our 27, 25 lithium batteries.
Right. That's the usage hours in the chart you see now is based on a 600 amp hour bank.
Yeah.
And so now you can see, well, if I just had an anchor light on, not running my refrigerator or anything else, if I'm just running my anchor light alone, it puts us around 4,000 hours of runtime. I mean, and that is just, it's a game changer.
Yeah.
I mean, being able to do that and to run, and there's even bigger things, I mean, of the time of the high powered and high consuming devices.
Yeah, so let's look, Brian, at these are the kind of middle
Moderate
draw devices.
So 1 amp to 5 amp kind of draw. The one that really stands out to me, which we all are guilty of leaving on, is the propane solenoid.
That was my wife.
Yeah, right. Yeah, my wife never turns that off. But just talking about the propane solenoid for a minute, I like to think of that electronic. It's basically an electronic solenoid that opens up the propane from the tank up to the oven, if your boat's equipped with a propane stove and oven. That will be, if you just have it turned on, you're not cooking. It has nothing to do with cooking or anything, but you're on. That's showing that you're drawing 1 amp an hour just from leaving it on.
Yeah.
So if you're not cooking, the Victron's going to remind you, turn it off.
Yeah.
You know, there's no need to have it on. And it's kind of a safety thing too. Shut it off and keep it off when you don't need it.
That's a good one.
If you think about power management just as a whole, that's the idea, right? Just all those little things that you don't think about turning off.
But they add up. when
But
you-
they add
yeah,
up.
yeah.
So when you're anchored out for 2 or 3 nights at one spot, if you can, turn a bunch of these little devices off, whether it be, a low or a moderate, it's like, hey, as much as we can we're not using that we can power off, it makes a big difference.
But now you're watching it too on that monitor.
Yeah.
You're not just guessing on voltage or,
For sure.
it's way easier for sure.
We all become a little obsessed. Once you get a hold of that app, you're going,
Yeah.
geez, now you're watching.
all
it
of us
come
in the
in.
cockpit looking at our apps, like you said.
What, should we look at what the high draw
Yeah,
does?
absolutely. Yeah, so the next one goes in just to basically how many usage hours that each one of those devices will give you. So let's go on to the high draw stuff. This is where it gets pretty interesting. Our boats today in the outboard models we do with lithium, they all have, we touched on it, they all have a heat pump now and they have an air conditioning pump. And it's one device. It's I always tell everyone it's like a heat pump at your house. It heats when you want heat, and it cools when you want cooling. So, but that is a high-powered device, and so when you run, if you look, you can look at the chart and see that it says Velair, startup, running, and restart. And really, I think the most interesting part about we started outside on a cold winter day or a fall day, and it was 48 degrees outside. We got inside the boat. It's 58 degrees to start, and now we got to get to 70. We just use that as a baseline. And what's really cool about the new systems we're putting in is they have a variable speed drive that varies their fan speed and their compressor speed at the same time. So what that means is you'll look at the Velair AC startup and it was drawing, 100 amps.
Yeah.
You could never put that kind of amp load on a lead acid or an AGM battery because it would be pulling way too much voltage to where it would send an inverter into an error state trying to run it. But that startup, what you'll see on there is it took us to get from 58 degrees to 70 degrees in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what's cool about it is when it starts up and it runs, you're drawing a pretty good amount of power, 100 amp pull to start up. But once it got there, it goes into this kind of maintain mode. And so once the warm air started to heat up and it started to circulate that warm air through the return of the unit, that variable speed fan and compressor slows down, which
Wasn't having to work as hard.
half as hard.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So that was the
so-
cool part that we didn't notice. We didn't realize either before we did the test.
Right.
And played with it. It was like,
We didn't. We just thought, oh, well, here you go. It's just going to run 100 amps all the time. But that unit now really on average is going to draw around 50 or 60 amps, which is still a higher consuming device is what I would say in power. But with lithium, it enables you to run it now for a long time, especially with that variable speed drive.
Yeah, that's
And even things, the other thing we didn't take into consideration on these types of things that you see, a water heater, a barbecue, the electric grill in the back, the heat pump for heating is, well, once you reach temperature, it stops.
Yeah.
And it's shut. You're not using anything. So that was our hardest part during the testing of actually seeing how much power was getting the thing to turn back on. Tim talked about it earlier.
Forever.
The fiberglass, really, the boats held their heat or their cool really well. That we had our watches going at an hour and 45
I
minutes.
think Kenny had to open the door finally.
I got a little annoyed. I was like, all right, let's go. Kick back on now.
48 degrees outside, and we couldn't get the cabin to come down. I don't know if Kenny
get
was
the
nervous
thermostat
around me and he was breathing really hard or something, but
Yeah, it was.
he was fogging up the
So
windows.
the other thing that's intriguing is with outboard power, we've never been able to have hot water.
Exactly.
So tell me how that works.
So same exact idea as the air conditioning system or a barbecue of a high load device. Lithium maintains its voltage even when you put a big strain against that battery. So you run a hot water heater. Before, we used to tell people on the outboards all the time, we'll fire up the hot water heater while you're on shore power before you leave the dock.
Right.
And then it holds its temp for even a day or two.
Yeah.
But now it enables you with the lithium package to turn it on just like you were plugged into power. You do have to pay attention.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where, again, the Victron monitor comes in, where you can see if I'm running a water heater, it draws, you know, I have to go back to the other screen to actually see the amps, but a water heater had approximately 70 amps that it was pulling, and that is DC. Pulled 70 amps, but again, once it gets up to temp,
Yeah.
it shuts off until it needs to warm that water back up
Right.
again. So you're really only running those half the time that you think.
Hour and a half to get it warm.
But conceivably, we're on the hook at one of our favorite spots, and we decide to go to another one of our favorite spots.
Right.
At that point, we turn the hot water heater on, the inverter on, start the engine,
Yep.
and we're charging while we're going, so that we're not really taking away from our battery bank that much on the way to the new spot.
Exactly. And that depends too, as we'll go into being able to see as we talk about engine charging versus shore power charging and some of those things, to, you know, see the output of the alternator. That'll tell you, you know, if you're drawing 60 amps on a water heater, but you bring your battery bank down because you've been anchored. Now, I mean, with lithium, now you can anchor for a lot more time than you ever used to be able to. But sometimes you need to pull those power draws off and let it do its thing to recharge. So
Which is a great segue into the next slide.
I don't know how we do this. This
Like
is
we know what we're
amazing.
doing.
Let's talk about how do we get these things recharged when we're using them.
I mean, I talk about it on taking calls, but I had a guy call me yesterday, and he said, well, he's owned his boat for 5 years. He said, how am I charging batteries? I go, well, you're charging every time you start the engine. He said, how do I do that? Well, with an alternator. But the Yamaha has an alternator that has a 70 amp alternator on it. So every time you start it, you run the engine, it's going to be providing a charge going back into those batteries. Just because it says you have 70 amps doesn't mean you're going to see 70 amps going into the battery, because the engine takes some of its own power to run its electronics and things with it too. But at idle on the engine, we tested that too. At idle, just firing up the motor, if I needed a recharge, I was able to put in 30 amps, an hour going right back into those batteries. So you think about, I take away some of those high load things and go back to my real basics and go, I need lighting, I need anchor lights, I need refrigeration, I need some of these things to work. Those are all super low, so you could recharge a bank really quick even with a 70 amp alternator. But the one thing that we didn't touch on during all of the testing that we did of seeing the different loads and devices was solar. I mean, solar is huge. We get a lot of people that ask us, even, if they're looking at our boats or whatever it is, that say, how does the solar panel really do anything?
Or what does it do?
Or what does it do?
What's it there for? I really don't know.
Honestly, that's what I tell them. You don't even, it's there. You might have to wash the bird poop off of it every once in a while, but it is a fully automatic, controlled, automatically controlled device that's going to put power back into your batteries. Yeah. So as you use it from refrigeration and some of those other things, that solar's putting in. And we see, on a sunny day, anchored out somewhere, we'll see 8 to 10 amps coming in from a solar panel, which is like, you can, back to the other charts, you'll see a refrigerator draws 2.5 amps.
Yeah.
And so if you're watching that Victron we talk about, that solar actually does. To me,
Makes a big difference.
it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Awesome.
And then, you have kind of 3 ways to charge those lithium batteries. You have running the engine,
Yep.
the solar, which is doing it automatically, and then back to shore power. So you get home, you get to another marina, maybe you want to go in and take a shower after anchoring out, do laundry, if we don't have a 43. Yeah, not all of us get that washer dryer, but you do let us use it. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you plug into power, and now you can do it with your onboard battery charger. Yeah. And so that will put in around 60 amps an hour going back. So it's pretty easy when you look at, the math, as we go further down, as you look at how much power you use, knowing how much power you can put back in via these engine, solar, and shore power battery charger, then you can figure out. And your Victron will tell you. Yep. It'll tell you exactly
that's the
time to
beauty
get
of it.
back. So
Yeah, that was a game changer for me this summer, having the Victron and being able to monitor my battery, my system, and know exactly what it was. And we're usually every couple days we're going to our next favorite spot, and it's usually 4 or 5 hour run, and so you get a lot of charge doing just moving around. We're rarely somewhere more than a couple of days. So.
And that brings on to what's there now, figuring out what is, how much power. Let's say we're on anchor and we used half of our battery bank. Well, in the case of a 27, you have a 600 amp hour battery bank. So if you use 50% of that after 2 or 3 days on anchor, then you need to make up that 300 amp hours. Yep. And so if I'm putting in 50 amps by running the engine, then I have 5 to 6 hours of runtime,
right?
And I'll be back to full. Yep. Again, not figuring in what the solar can do.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
And you're watching it on that Victron, as it happens.
And like Jeff says, right the second you stop your motors, you're anchored, you're situated, motor off, the solar kicks in. Whatever the solar can bring in at that point, it's going to do so. Yep. And that's, thinking about switches and accidentally turning one on or not turning one off, it's automatic. Yeah, so you don't have to remember to go down there. To go turn it on, like, okay, I gotta put my solar on now. It's going to do it on its own.
Just like the motor, right?
So no, you don't have to flip any switches to turn your solar panel on. It's going to do its thing no matter what you have. House power, main cutoff switch, that can be off, it charges.
Yep. It's also smart, so it knows once your batteries are fully charged, it'll stop charging.
That's another good one. That's a big thing with all batteries, is to shut down at 100%, and it does the same thing on the
not burn your
lithium
batteries.
Let's talk about DC to DC charger. Is that something you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back into how hard is it to convert my boat to lithium. That's one of the components. The big part of lithium iron phosphate batteries is figuring out how to charge them correctly. Well, by us waiting 20 years, someone said they've been around for 20 years. So right. I know, but
we're not the guinea pigs.
Now we're not the guinea pigs, but now they make a device called a DC to DC charger, and that DC to DC charger basically takes the voltage that the engine would provide, that in a normal lead acid or AGM that we could just push right to that type of battery. You have to change that voltage. And so the DC to DC charger regulates a certain voltage specific to charge lithium. So it comes in from the engine, and then it converts it to be able to charge into that lithium to where you don't hurt the battery or the longevity of that battery.
Roger that.
So that's where that one gets.
Okay.
And solar runs through that as well, right?
It does. So it also, because of the DC to DC charger that we use, it's basically a dual input charger. So now you can eliminate the need for a solar controller.
Right.
And so it has a priority where the engine is its first priority. When you're running the engine, it's going to convert and put that voltage in from that. And then when you're not running the engine, it runs the solar and regulates that voltage to go into lithium.
And you're not limited like a traditional controller that you might get 10 amps. We can bring in quite a bit more now.
Because they're 50 amps, so you can certainly do that.
Yeah.
And
so if someone, sorry, Sam, if someone wants to add a second panel, then they can go into the DC to DC.
Typically, depending on putting on another panel, we We don't always do that, but
I mean, if they want to do it on their own, though.
Depending on how high of the wattage of panel you go to, we use a 175 watt panel. If you match another 175 watt panel, you can maintain the wiring that we already used there.
Right.
And the DC to DC charger will handle that. Where in years past, you only had a 10 amp controller where it was maxed out to one panel. So now short of your wire size, you can put a lot of panels up there
Okay.
and control that through it. So
What were you going to say, Sam?
And so solar is charging just the house bank, right?
yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
yep. And
Are you asking for a friend?
For a friend. I know.
it's good because in prior years, not to go way back, but in prior years, we didn't need a DC to DC charger, so we had to have a separate controller for the solar panels. And in that case, some of those controllers did have multi-bank controllers. But
Like a
what we've
90-10.
also
Yeah.
done on our boats is we've taken, the parasitic draw that we talked about earlier, that's going to the house.
Yeah.
You're not drawing any power
Engine
against your
battery or
engine
thruster.
battery or thruster battery where you're worried like you need to have solar going
Gotcha.
into it. So that's the idea, is we put everything on the house side of things now rather than some of those other batteries.
Always start your motor up and get out of there if you have
Yes.
to.
Yep, as a backup. So
So we're ready for questions.
Yep.
yep.
Yes,
Yep.
they do.
And your shore power will charge all the batteries as well. Solar just is house only.
And to touch on that, which we didn't, when you're running the engine, we talked about it charging the house batteries, but it charges all the batteries.
Yeah, thruster.
So all 3 banks of batteries that we put on with the bow thruster and engine, or the shore power battery charger will charge all those batteries.
And solar is just house.
Correct.
And just since we're on the topic, even though the battery chemistries are different, start battery, thruster battery, and house battery, that charger knows what it's doing and charges them at
Yes.
That's correct.
the correct
Yeah.
You're trying to send us down a deep,
just,
deep.
That's correct. That's correct, Sam.
Yes, it charges all the batteries.
That's correct.
Gotcha.
Is that also for your friend?
So,
So for our boats, we do a 3,000 watt inverter.
Yep.
So-
Well, on the 27, it's a 3,000
Yeah.
watt. We don't need 3,000
On the
from
others.
25, 23.
And it's set up for 120 volts. It's
Everything
not,
operates.
It's
Yeah.
not
There's
too-
no converters that you have to have. And if you have, but that question, you got to go back a little bit to it, because they're asking, what was the question? If I add air conditioning?
No, if I was running air conditioning, but then he asked about solar, if he needed from 240 to 120. But everything on the boat's 120.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's we have 240 on the boat.
Okay.
So I think it
So I
goes
look
back
back
to
at our
that
slide
I
that we
think
did.
that one is the Victron, like you say.
And
Well, that's the thing, is that you'll always, even looking at the chart though, like if you look at the app, it's just straight up going to tell you real time right now how many hours. Like we always look at the battery itself, and you can see how many amps you're at moving around. But if you scroll through that menu, you can see your hours there too. So if you're worried before you go to bed,
Yeah.
hey, right now with what's on,
Yeah.
how many hours I have, it'll show you right
And
there.
it changes
Yeah,
every
where's
day,
more
right?
detail
With
too.
solar and, if you're running the motor,
Yeah.
there's a lot of variables.
From
that are-
that chart right there, the answer to that is it's going to be somewhere in the 6 to 8 hour range between startup, running, and restart.
What was the question
How long-
was,
how
how
long
long
can I
can I
run
run
my
the
air
air?
conditioning?
Yeah.
Well, but keep in mind, that's only when they're running. So when they went off, yes,
There
they
were
were
2 hours with it wasn't
Yeah.
even kicking on.
So if you're running 60 amps on an air conditioner, but it's only at a 50% duty cycle, or it's running half the time, you could get double that pretty easily.
And whether it's the winter time and you're running the heat, or it's the summer and you're running the air, it's the same idea. It's like once that cabin gets to your desired temp, it does a pretty good job holding that temp too.
Yeah.
So that's the other nice part about it.
I think the new Bel Air units have a app, don't they? Where you can turn the unit on and off or adjust temperature. You're laying in bed, you shut it down maybe if you need to.
Well, and we touched on that anyways. Most people aren't running it full time. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
it
it's
took
not
us
running.
20 minutes to heat up the cabin to 70, and we're trying to shut it off. I mean, it's warm. So,
It's a good problem.
So that's
wouldn't want to do the start battery, and you wouldn't want to do the thruster.
And you wouldn't really need to, it's not gonna fluctuate much. If you're running a motor, it's recharging, same as the thrusters. So the house is the one that really goes up and down as you're not, running a motor. As you're using those devices, that's the one you see that fluctuates the most.
But he also seems to have AGM batteries. He's saying whatever stock batteries. So
20,
you would need additional equipment.
Yeah.
without a doubt.
Wiring.
Yeah,
right.
and
We
that's
talk-
his
we
question.
talked about that.
Yeah.
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 And I think I know we talked about but like the house bank is the only lithium. You still have the start, you still have the thruster, which really, if you're going to use your thruster, your engine's going to be ready. You're going to be charging at that point too. So it's really, and just on the lithium side, anyways, when you're running your normal, like forget the AC side, if you're running just your normal 12-volt devices, you have so much power with those that you can use.
It's because the engines still today do not like, the alternator doesn't output the right voltage to go into a lithium battery. And so they just are not compatible. At some point they might make them more compatible, but it is,
Isn't it a little bit the cold cranking amps as well?
I mean, they can take a high load.
Right.
And they do have starting lithium iron phosphate batteries now. But from what I understood is the engines don't like that the voltage remains high on the lithium batteries. But I think that's a thing of the future, which is, I would imagine, going to happen pretty quick.
What's Alderson's question?
He's asking about if lithium is an option on the 29s and 31s, and if not, can his boat be the first? I was avoiding that one, but
just
Do we have Tim's money yet?
yeah, that's the better question.
So the 2931, we're still doing the diesel generator.
Yep.
And so there's no need for the lithium in those boats. Not that we may not do that at some point in life, but it's not currently on the in the plans.
Right. And even it's going back to a northwest
Yeah.
style to it. But the answer is no at this point, Tim.
Yeah.
looks like we have one of, can you mix AGM for starting batteries and lithium, which I think we answered. But yeah, you can use a single charger. Bank 1 can be set to a different battery type than banks 2 and 3. So
Yeah, they're a multi-bank charger.
Yep. We just haven't done it. We haven't.
I know how much the batteries.
The batteries
I
are
know, like
expensive.
equipment wise, but then labor for someone to take what you have existing out and put that in.
to put in what
I would rather
we
think
do
10
today.
grand,
I
least.
think it's double that.
Really?
I
Yeah,
think
your
it's closer to
equipment's that.
20 by the
Running all
time.
the cables around.
Yep.
Taking out,
Just in terms
taking
of-
out the old stuff.
Yeah.
It's not a simple swap of the batteries for sure.
Yeah. If you're paying someone especially, it's going to be.
Yeah.
That's a great question, because if you look at the capacity of what we do, a 600 amp hour bank, well, one additional battery is really easy to kind of tailor that bank to what you want. So adding one battery is going to give you quite a bit more, 300 more amp hours. So certainly you could add to it.
Looks like Chris is asking about the lithium. I think he's asking lithium amp hours on a 25, which would be the same as our 27.
Yeah. So
Yep.
2 battery.
Right around 600 amp hours.
Right.
So Martin says he did his for 12 grand. I also think Martin might have done his own.
He did quite a bit.
I was gonna say exactly.
That's
Yeah.
another.
Mark, will
20
you
grand.
do mine for 12?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have some projects for
He
you, Martin.
might not have. I don't remember.
I think
He
I think
did
Martin
his.
does have
did,
lots
yeah.
of good videos about how to do that too. So
And that is,
he's a great resource. Thanks for chiming in, Martin. Solar generator, what's the question there from Jonathan?
Oh, Ronnie, can we order the little boat dolls on the table? So the guy, there's a guy named Rock who makes these.
I think he made these for us. I'm not sure he's gonna make any more, but
I'll give you his contact information. Super nice guy, very creative.
Ronnie,
These are all these little rails. You probably can't see them, but they're like made out of paper clips and sewing needles, and they're really cool.
For the creatives.
what's, Brian, what's the question about the solar generator? So the solar generator takes place of shore power. It doesn't add to the battery system. So,
I think the idea might be like a jackery or.
yeah, solar generator, and it just acts like you're hooked to shore power, but it would charge your house bank,
Yeah.
but it doesn't add to the bank itself.
Got it.
I have one of those, that's why I know that.
Expert on that one.
60.
60 amps.
60 amp charger.
Yeah.
Yeah, on a lithium
Yeah.
boat.
Yeah.
Well, I think he says on an R25.
Chris,
Butler.
yeah,
It just got to make sure there's multiple R25s. So on an R25 luxury edition with the lithium package,
60 amp.
it's a 60 amp battery charger.
Yep.
The last ones or the other 20 amps?
20 amps traditionally, yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Sweet.
There's a good one though. If they have 6 100 amp hour lithium batteries now, can they replace to the bigger 200 and 80 or the 320 amp hour batteries that we're currently
Jim Thompson.
installing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Dakota, who is one of the manufacturers that we've used, says that you should maintain a similar size battery. So if it's a 280 amp hour, they are okay with you doing a 320, but they're not okay with you
You wouldn't
adding
want
a
to add
320 to
No,
a
he's-
100 amp.
No,
He's
but
acting-
he's saying when it comes time to replace his 6
We wanna
100,
replace
can
them
you
with
go
the-
to 2?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Absolutely.
There's nothing, that
No,
part
right.
doesn't change.
No, or he
Other
can
than the
add-
wiring just of that
Right.
bank.
Add
You
the
just don't want
battery.
to mix the different
Amp-
sizes.
amperages.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to
Yeah.
add a 300 amp hour single
100,
battery
yeah.
to
But the
100.
280 can go with the 320 if they're
Yes,
close.
close.
Okay.
Yep. You got a long time on that, Jim.
I was gonna say. Yeah. Got a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate that this evening, and it gave us a chance to all get together and see each other's faces. The guys have been out doing deliveries and all the other things around here. So thank you. Until
Thank
next
you.
time.
Thanks,
Good
everybody.
night.
Good night.
We'll see you guys.
Thank you.